Hello everyone, I am the Weather Dude, welcome back, and today I have put out a danger notice because we have some severe thunderstorms that are starting to form across the south as we continue through this afternoon and into this evening, and they pose a dangerous threat to states like Alabama, Georgia, even parts of Florida and South Carolina. So for more, be sure to stick through till the end. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe, and we're just going to get right into it here and talk about the threat. So, Storm Prediction Center has put out enhanced risk for southern Georgia. I feel like that's where the main target is going to be. But like I said, this threat will extend up. All right, don't rule out the Carolinas, although your threat will probably be coming in as we head into tomorrow, highlighted by that marginal risk there. But we're going to start off by focusing here in, again, Alabama, Georgia, and even Florida down the East Coast. And that's bad news because, as you may or may not have seen, Fort Lauderdale just got soaked by like 20 inches of rain like just the other day. I think 20 inches around there. It came in about a day, and it just swamped the entire place. I mean, like waters were covering. I believe the airport had to be shut down. There might have even been some tidal flooding on top of that. So it wasn't a fun time down there. But you guys could get more severe weather. It's a slight risk, but still, I mean, it's slight. I know slight sounds kind of, meh, but on the Storm Prediction Center, slight is actually like 2 out of 5, so it's pretty high up there. All right, it's kind of like towards the middle, and then enhanced risk is 3 out of 5. So that's think of it of out of 5, not by like the terminology they use, right? So 3 out of 5, that's still a pretty significant threat. And of course, a marginal threat back towards the Central Plains. Their threat is not significant. We're going to kind of focus on the Southeast in this video. Their threat will also come tomorrow, so we'll be focusing on that because based on what some of the modeling has been showing, the storms out there do look pretty significant. And that's going to continue. All right, so this is today, and then this is Friday, and then Saturday. All right, so tornado threat, 10%. Again, doesn't sound high, but when you consider it's third, it's like kind of like number 3 on the list. You got these numbers out ahead. I would consider that still pretty significant. Anywhere like in this 5 and 10 zone, I would say definitely be aware for sure. And the wind, for the wind, again, 15%, but again, it goes as high as about 60, and then you get to a significant parameter. But still, a pretty decent-sized wind threat, and of course the hail. Hail, a little bit reduced threat, kind of from what the Storm Prediction Center says, it's kind of constrained to like Jacksonville and Deltona, Daytona Beach, around Titusville, those areas, the Space Coast, and that's about it. But still, Miami and Columbus, Georgia, and Montgomery are all in that 5% risk. All right, so if we look here, let's go to the mesoscale discussion. Oh, sorry, actually, this is the mesoscale discussion. First, we're going to talk about a tornado watch that was actually put out for this area in southern Georgia, as was expected here. You can already see some supercell activity starting to form. Now, again, we're going to monitor that as soon as we're done with these Storm Prediction Center maps. We're going to get right into that. But you can already see some thunderstorm activity to the north through Athens, Atlanta, Georgia, up in those areas. Augusta, Georgia included in that, Savannah included in that. So tornado risk in this tornado watch, moderate. The risk of EF2 or higher tornadoes is low, but not 0. Severe wind is moderate, and severe wind is kind of classified, if you go in the Storm Prediction Center map here, classified as wind gusts of 50 knots or greater. So basically about 55 or around 58 miles an hour or so, or greater winds, which is kind of like the classification for severe weather, 58 mile an hour winds or greater in that area. All right, so severe hail, moderate, so about 1 inch in diameter is what they classify it as, but 2-inch greater hail is a lower threat, but again, still not 0. All right, now let's get into the mesoscale discussion. Now this kind of, so we had like southern Georgia here, but now we got a mesoscale discussion for the northeast coast of Florida because there have been some intensifying thunderstorms. And those are probable by 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. So from the time I'm recording this video in about 1.5 to 2 hours, with some severe hail, locally damaging wind gusts, and perhaps a brief tornado. So that was just a mesoscale discussion, and it's a severe watch. Watch probability is 80%, so expect a severe thunderstorm watch. All right, and that it is again for about Jacksonville, Titusville, Deltona, Daytona Beach, in like the southern, very southern tip of Georgia. All right, so now that we got those mesoscale discussions and the Storm Prediction Center maps out of the way, let's get into some of the modeling. And I'm going to kind of just focus in on the high resolution model, the HRRR, just because it's kind of like the most accurate for like this short of a time period. Because these storms are either, already here or going to be happening in a couple hours for some other areas. Dew points, you can kind of see why this is happening. I mean, dew points are not the highest they can be I've seen higher for severe weather, but I mean 60s is especially mid to high 60s in the kind of higher threat zone in Georgia. It's still pretty high. All right, that's definitely a lot of moisture, and even down southeast Georgia and northeast Florida, dew points are in the 70s as indicated by that lavender color. So, and down in South Florida, it's in the mid 70s. So again, I mean that is more than enough moisture, and you're going to see that as the storms kind of like move their way through the areas. You can see some lighter shades of blue working their way in there because when the storms kind of like rain themselves out, and sometimes it starts to dry out a little bit, the front moves through, and you can kind of see the low pressure spinning. We're going to take a good look at that as well, but dew points out in Mississippi and Alabama by the time we head to tomorrow morning going to be great. 50s, it's going to feel great. Still, Georgia, the Carolinas, and Florida will still be in the mid 60s though, so still going to be pretty muggy out there. So let's look at it on the radar, and you can kind of see on the future radar where this low is, and in the spirit of it being a low pressure system, let's make it red. All right, you can see right here, there's that center about 1,002-ish millibars. Kind of that outer ring says 1,004, so it could be like 1,002, 1,003 millibars of pressure, which again, for just a regular old low pressure, like this, if that was a tropical system, it'd be like, nah, well, who cares? But for a regular like kind of like landmass low pressure, that's pretty good, and it was strengthening up until this point, and it will continue to. The pressure dot you'll see get a little smaller here. See 1,004, it kind of gets a little small because so we have another ring forming, so that's about 1,002 to 1,001 as the low kind of moves off to the north and west. A millibar of pressure really not going to make all the much difference here, but what you can see is why I kind of like put that danger alert out there, because these bands kind of almost kind of like a little indent in there, kind of like a little hook echo, a little backward C. We can start to see some of those forming. And I know it sometimes, I mean, this even looks impressive on future radar, but even if it doesn't, that doesn't mean they can't form into something, because I know some future radars kind of like over-exaggerate, some under-exaggerate, but definitely take this threat pretty seriously. All right, and you're going to see these bands that kind of form, and the reason they have that shape is because this low back here, right, you can kind of see the rotation of it right here. It's kind of like pushing the wind up like this, so the bands that form are going to have that that kind of hook backward C because of the way the wind is kind of pushing into them, if that makes sense. All right, so you're going to kind of see the bands are going to be shaped like this, and that's how we're going to get those bands of thunderstorms that could turn out to be pretty strong in some areas. All right, and again, as I said, tomorrow I'll move up into the Carolinas, but that's just in the morning. In the afternoon, they'll obviously get stronger than that. All right, so let's look at the total rainfall as indicated by the QPF. Now, this isn't exactly a good gauge because the thunderstorms could be even locally heavier than this. As I'm not saying the totals are necessarily off by a lot. It's just that we don't know where it could happen, right? Because it could happen because it's very localized. Even though there are some bands here, it's still localized in terms of where it happens. All right, as with a good chunk of severe weather events. So kind of like where that low pressure is spinning, that greater low pressure center, you're going to see a little bit more widespread rainfall, right? From like central Mississippi. And I know Jackson kind of has that water issue there, so I'm not sure if this would help. But 1 to possibly as much as 2.5 inches in central Mississippi there. And of course, where the heavy rainfall does occur, like in southeast Georgia, that's over 4 to 5 inches. They're kind of near Savannah, a little bit south. But again, right in these bands, 1.5 to 2 inches anywhere in these areas I'm highlighting right now. You might be like, okay, that's not a big deal, but when it's happening in an hour or two, right, when these severe storms move through, right, that rainfall can come quickly and still cause some problems. And so definitely keep that in mind. It may not sound like a lot if it was happening over a few days or if it was happening over a month, but when it's happening in an hour or two or even less, that starts to become an issue. All right, Cape values, this could be the one saving grace. And there's a lot of instability out there, don't get me wrong. It's definitely been, there has been some sun peaking where the storms haven't been falling already. There's been some sun peaking out, so there's been some instability. But I would say it's not the strongest I've ever seen. But that does not mean, like in some areas, the Cape values, especially down Georgia and Florida, will still be up there. Maybe about 1,000 to 1,500 joules per kilogram. All right, so still some Cape values. All right, but again, the moisture definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. And the shear that I'm going to get into in a little bit will be another factor that will kind of make up for that, kind of that rotating wind as we go up in height. So there's kind of like what we call directional shear, where the wind can change direction with height, which is kind of what we see here. There also is speed shear, where the wind can change speeds as you change height. All right, so those are the two we'll be looking for here, and you'll see some directional shear with this system. But still, there are some. Oop, don't want to pull up the sounding. But there are still some areas where the Cape values could get over 1,000 to 1,500 joules per kilogram. So that's still pretty up there. All right, let's take a look at the bulk shear, and I have another map, another set of maps after we go through the models that'll kind of show this off a little bit better. Here you have the shear, and you can see it is pretty strong, right? I mean, we got some shear values of 50, 60 knots. All right, you can kind of notice how it's coming out of the south, right, at those higher elevations, and keep that in mind from what we look at next. But you can see the shear values, right, and that kind of like, if you want to call it like an upper level jet, sort of, that's kind of like coming in, sweeping the winds up from the south, all right? And of course, also because of our low pressure system that's kind of sitting back here spinning. All right, if we look at the supercell composite, you can see kind of like pinpointing where we could see these supercells develop. I don't think there'll be a ton of supercells. That doesn't mean we can't see some stronger cells, but you can see some supercells could develop in southeastern Georgia, as indicated. It's a very small area, but indicated by that coloring there on the graphic. Then you can see other areas, just like it's kind of like a low marginal threat of supercells, but definitely still something to keep an eye on. And the significant tornado parameters, kind of showing where we could see some significant tornadoes. All right, again, tornado threat is a little lower with this set of storms. It's kind of batch here, but there is still a threat. There's still some grays and some blues, all right, which is still, grays and blues are still kind of up here. So the threat is definitely not zero. Right? I have seen higher. That doesn't mean the threat is zero. I just want to make sure that stands out clear. All right, so let's take a look now at kind of the set of maps from windy.com here that kind of will show this off better. So you kind of notice winds at the surface are actually kind of coming out of the east. It's coming out of the south here, but over Georgia, the winds are kind of coming out of the east-southeast, right? Kind of like closer to that low pressure system. It's kind of dragging those coastal winds in, so maybe a little higher water levels today along the southeast coast. Winds aren't that strong, so you probably won't see that much of a difference, but if we look at the winds, again, east-southeast at the surface. If we go up to 5,000 feet, you'll notice it's not too different, although we're starting to see a little bit more, like in central South Georgia, the winds are kind of coming out of the south now. Northern part of the state, they're still kind of being dragged out of that same direction, but this part of the state, and I think that's why they highlighted that tornado threat, because it's more obvious that the winds at the surface, if we go back here, much more obvious are coming out of the east-southeast. May not be strong, but they're still coming out of that direction. And there's also some speed shear, I guess, because they are changing with height, or changing speed with height, but that's kind of normal. Winds do usually get stronger with height with these systems. You can see more obviously coming out of the south. And if we go to like jet stream level, kind of like I meant to do 300 millibars here. If we pull that up, you can see, again, now the entire state, it's more obviously coming out of the south. Even more obvious now. If it wasn't apparent before, it definitely is now. All right, so really coming out of the south here, and that change of wind with height, when you get the winds coming out of the east to the surface, out of the south at higher elevations, you can get that rotation and you can get those tornadoes to form. So again, not the highest tornado threat I've seen, but still a threat to keep an eye out for. All right, so to kind of finish off, let's finish off with the National Weather Service radar here to kind of get a better look. You can really see kind of like a tropical system. We got the center low pressure here, kind of got some rain bands. Best looking low pressure I've seen. But around Jackson, between Jackson and Hattiesburg, we have some heavier rain. Like I showed you on the weather model earlier on the high resolution model, that's kind of where we have that more concentrated area of rain. But then to the east of that is where we got these bands of severe weather that are starting to form and will only get stronger over the next couple of hours. All right. So again, let's kind of zoom in. We'll just kind of get a look at this. Between Albany and Fitzgerald here in Georgia, you could definitely see some stronger like DBZs, some higher colors. Between 50 and 60 on the DBZ scale, which is pretty high. So definitely some intense rainfall and some high winds. Look at the base velocity here, right? And we kind of zoom in. The reds and greens are kind of look at the base velocity as a tornadic threat. Reds and greens aren't really touching, but they're getting close. So that's definitely something to watch out for, because the most tornadic or quote unquote dangerous, higher potential to be tornadic cell would be in here, because reds and greens aren't really touching, but they are very close. All right, so definitely starting to see some little bit of rotation, but not enough to spark any kind of like tornado warning at the moment. If we look at 1 hour precipitation from some of these storms, I'm on the, I think this is the Valdosta local radar. And you can see if we zoom in right around Albany where it apparently just moved through, in those lighter greens and moderate greens, you can see 1 to 1.2 inches of rain in an hour. So over an inch an hour, that can definitely cause some flooding concerns. I'm not sure if flash flood, I don't believe flash flood warnings have been put out yet, but I would definitely say this is something to be on the alert for here. So that will conclude this video. Thank you guys for watching. Again, if you live in the southeast, as the storms build over the next couple of hours, be sure you're prepared in the interior safe space in the lowest level, away from windows, of course, if you should get a severe thunderstorm warning with a tornado tag or a tornado warning. So thank you guys for watching. I am the Weather Dude. Stay safe. I will catch you guys in the next video.